money is only a few thousand years old, but trade is way older than that. Long before coins or paper bills existed, humans were swapping goods across entire continents, using nothing but relationships and memory. Some trade routes moved objects over 2,000 kilometers, further than most modern road trips. These goods passed hand to hand between people who never met and never would. No trucks carried these goods, no roads guided the way, no banks tracked the value. Just people carrying resources on foot, one exchange at a time, over generations. In the next few minutes, you'll see exactly how ancient humans built entire working economies without a single coin, and why that system worked so well for so long. Picture Africa, around 300,000 years ago. Early Homo sapiens live in small bands, moving with the seasons and following herds across open grassland. They hunt, gather, and build temporary camps near water. There are no permanent cities, no writing, no numbers scratched onto paper anywhere. And yet, archaeologists have found red ochre pigment in these ancient camps that came from sources over 200 kilometers away, carried across rivers, hills, and open plains. Someone carried that pigment across that distance, on foot without a map. Someone traded for it, piece by piece, likely over months or years. That's the mystery we're solving today. Here's the surprising part. These groups had no money, no marketplaces, and often no direct contact with the people who first mined or gathered these goods. Yet materials still moved hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers through chains of small, unconnected communities. Obsidian tools first shaped near Yellowstone have turned up in Ohio, more than 2,400 kilometers away, moving through the hands of people who never saw the source. Shells collected from ocean coastlines show up in inland caves far from any beach a person could walk to in a lifetime. This pattern wasn't random. It was a real system, built on rules everyone understood, even without a single written contract or law. Cause 1. Why did they trade at all? Survival made trading necessary, plain and simple. No single group had every resource it needed nearby, no matter how skilled or resourceful they were. One valley had excellent stone for cutting tools. Another had salt for preserving meat through long winters. A third sat near rich hunting grounds but had almost no stone at all. Trading meant a group didn't have to constantly move or fight over scarce resources. It meant filling in the gaps that local nature simply couldn't provide, without giving up your home territory or risking open conflict. Cause 2. Why the system worked without money. Small groups relied on memory and trust instead of currency, and that trust ran deep. Everyone in the band knew everyone else, often for their entire lives, sometimes from birth to old age. If you gave someone meat this month, they remembered it clearly without needing a receipt. They'd return the favor later, maybe with tools, maybe with useful information about where water or game could be found. Debts lived in memory, not in coins stacked somewhere in a vault. Reputation itself worked as the real currency. A bad reputation could cost you far more than any object ever could, since nobody wanted to trade with someone who never gave back. Compare that system to today. We trade with total strangers constantly, without a second thought about who they are. You don't know the farmer who grew your food. You don't know the factory worker who assembled your phone either. Money solves a problem ancient trade rarely had to face at that scale. Tracking value fairly between people who don't know each other and might never meet again. That single problem is the real reason coins eventually appeared in human history, replacing memory with something more portable. Here's a common myth worth correcting right now. People often assume ancient trade meant simple, direct barter. One fish traded for one tool, right there on the spot, done and forgotten. Real ancient trade rarely worked that cleanly. Much of it ran on delayed exchange instead. You gave something now and got repaid later, sometimes years later, sometimes by a different person entirely. This system built long-term alliances, not just quick one-time transactions between strangers. Trade back then wasn't only economic. It held entire regions together socially, long before anyone drew a map of those regions. Now let's break this down piece by piece, starting with the simplest idea and building from there. First, the gift economy. In many hunter-gatherer societies, giving something away created an ongoing debt, not a completed sale. If you gave your neighbor a spear, you didn't expect payment right away, and asking directly was actually seen as rude. You expected them to help you later, exactly when you needed it most. This system actually rewarded generosity over hoarding. Keeping too much for yourself hurt your standing in the group instead of helping it. Generosity in this world was a smart long term strategy, not just a nice gesture between friends. Second, stone tool networks stretched further than most people expect. Obsidian, a sharp volcanic glass perfect for cutting, became one of the most heavily traded materials on Earth long before metal tools existed. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, obsidian moved across nearly 900 kilometers of rugged, mountainous terrain. It passed through dozens of different hands along the way. No single trader ever made that entire journey alone. Instead, neighboring communities passed goods along a long chain, a relay that continued for generations without anyone controlling the whole route. Each community only needed to trust the next group in that chain, not the entire network stretching far beyond their own territory. Third, the pigment trade reveals something deeper about ancient mines. Ochre wasn't just paint for decoration, even though it looked that way on the surface. At sites like Blombo's Cave in South Africa, researchers found ochre processing tools dating back tens of thousands of years, along with engraved pieces showing deliberate design. This pigment likely held symbolic and possibly spiritual meaning for the people who used it. Groups sought out specific ochre sources, some incredibly far from home, and carried the pigment back for burials, body decoration, and rituals. The distance itself may have added value. Rare and hard to get often meant important and worth real respect, similar to how rare materials still carry status today. Fourth, marriage worked as a form of trade, and this one genuinely surprises people the first time they hear it. In many ancient societies, marriage wasn't only about love or reproduction. It built lasting trade alliances between separate groups who might otherwise stay strangers forever. A daughter married into a neighboring band created a permanent trade and support link between two communities. That link could last for decades, sometimes across several generations of the same families. People moved along these networks too, not just goods. That movement carried skills, knowledge, and resources far beyond what any single trade route could carry alone. Fifth, shells worked as an early form of proto-money, long before anyone minted a coin. Long before coins, several ancient societies used shells like dentalium or cowrie as a recognized store of value. These weren't officially currency in the modern sense, but they worked in a remarkably similar way. They were rare, durable, easy to count, and hard to fake or copy. Communities near the coast traded shells inland for hundreds of kilometers, well beyond where anyone had ever seen the ocean. Those shells held recognized value even among total strangers who shared no language at all. In some regions, shell strings even carried set values, almost like an early price tag attached to a necklace. 6. Specialization made trade even more powerful over time. Once groups grew a little larger, not every person in a group hunted or made tools or gathered plants equally well, and everyone knew it. Some people got very good at one specific task, like flint knapping or tracking animals across difficult terrain. A skilled toolmaker could spend more time perfecting blades instead of hunting all day for food. Trading let that toolmaker focus on tools while someone else focused entirely on hunting. Everyone benefited when people traded their best skills instead of doing everything themselves, badly, alone. Seventh, information itself became a form of trade, maybe the oldest form of all. Knowing where water pooled during a dry season or which valley held migrating herds this time of year was worth more than almost any physical object. Groups traded this knowledge freely with allies, building trust that later turned into material exchange down the line. A tip about a good hunting ground today could mean a gift of meat tomorrow, or protection during a harsh season. In a world without maps or forecasts, knowledge like this could genuinely save a group from starvation. Eighth, trade often worked as quiet diplomacy between groups who might otherwise fight over the same land. Exchanging goods with a neighboring band signaled peaceful intentions without a single word spoken between leaders. Regular trading partners rarely raided each other, since the ongoing relationship was worth more than any short-term raid could ever be. In this way, trade routes doubled as informal peace treaties, keeping violence lower across entire regions for generations at a time, long before any formal agreement existed. Ninth, trust tracked every single exchange that took place instead of any written record. In small societies, nobody needed to write anything down on any surface. Everyone remembered who gave what to whom and exactly when it happened. This worked well because groups usually stayed small, often under 150 people total, a number some researchers see repeated across history. Everyone kept track socially, almost automatically, without any formal system at all. Once societies grew larger and started dealing regularly with strangers, memory alone simply couldn't keep up anymore. That exact gap is what eventually led to formal, standardized currency thousands of years later, once farming let populations grow far beyond what memory alone could ever track. So here's the full picture, pulled together after everything we've covered. Ancient humans built massive, genuinely functioning trade networks with zero money involved anywhere in the process. They relied on memory, reputation, generosity, and long chains of trust instead of coins or bills. Materials like obsidian and ochre moved further across the ancient world than most people today would ever guess. Marriage, gifts, shared knowledge, and shells all worked as real tools for exchange long before metal or paper currency ever existed anywhere on Earth. What changed everything, in the end, was scale, not failure. Small, trusting communities never needed money to function well. Large societies full of strangers eventually did need it, and badly, once memory alone stopped working. Money wasn't invented because ancient trade failed at its job. It was invented because trade succeeded so well that it outgrew memory and trust alone. So here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. If you lived in a world with no money at all, what would you trade first? Your skills, your tools, or your connections to other people? Drop your answer down in the comments below and be honest about it. And if this kind of deep dive into how ancient humans actually survived and built entire societies fascinates you, subscribe right now. There's a lot more hidden history exactly like this, waiting for you just below the surface.